Go. All right. Well, welcome everyone, and thanks for coming this evening. I appreciate it. It turned out to be a beautiful evening, so I'm happy you're all here. It's an honor to be here myself, so I appreciate your attendance. I also want to thank Molly and Caitlin with the museum for inviting me to speak, as well as for handling all the logistics. This is being recorded. It's going to be on YouTube. It's certain to go viral. We'll all be famous. You all knew me when nobody knew me. No, I'm happy to be here. So tonight I'll be talking about my photography over the past 20 years here in the Thousand Islands, how it began, how it's changed and evolved over that time. I'll discuss a little bit about my philosophies when it comes to photography and art. I'll talk about my background a bit, and also a little bit about my past as a geologist. And if time permits, I'll give a little geological history of the Thousand Islands, kind of a Cliff's Notes. Although I think in other lectures in this series, you may have gotten some of that before, but we'll see how it goes. And then hopefully at the end, there'll be some time for discussion and questions. It should be about 10 o'clock by that point. We'll move through. So for those of you who I haven't met yet, my name is Chris Murray, and I am a professional photographic artist. All the professional means is that I do this full time now. I live in Clayton year-round with my wife Jessica and our 3 cats. We moved here full-time last year. I was born and raised in Syracuse, lived away for a number of years, moved back to Syracuse in 2007, and then came up here full-time. It's always my dream to live up here. But I've been coming to the Thousand Islands my entire life, pretty much from the day I was born. Throughout my childhood and teenage years, used to spend a few weeks up here each summer in cottages that my parents would rent on various parts of the river. And those summers and those experiences turned out to be incredibly formative. It really charted the course my life was going to take and led me to here. It instilled in me a love of nature that obviously I have today. Just coming up here, I mean, Syracuse was nice and all that, but coming up here as a child, I think we all know, you're driving across Wellesley Island, you see all these massive road cuts and all the pink and orange granite and the islands. It was just, for a child, I just found it so captivating. And quickly became my favorite place. It still is. So that's the reason why I think years later, when I went to college, I became, speaking of which, that's me. Yes. One of the summers spending up here, my sister took a picture of this guy. I think I was 10 years old at that point. I was like 1950. No, that's not. 79, I believe. But years later, when I went to college and had to pick a major because I had to do something in my life, it made sense that I chose geology. I love the nature of the earth and learning about it. And I also wanted to learn about why the Thousand Islands are here, what caused all this beauty. But as much as I like geology, I never loved it. It just wasn't my passion. But you go to college, you have to pick a major. Life is like that. You have to do something for it. And geology was, like I said, it was interesting. It was fine. I got my undergraduate degree. I went to graduate school, and it was my final 6th year of graduate school. I wasn't a slacker. I just kind of did all the degrees. I discovered my real passion was landscape photography. This was really what I wanted to do with my life. I won't go into detail about how that happened or why it happened. I've kind of forgotten some of it myself, but it just was like lightning struck. I got a real camera. I bought a book, and something about that book, I just realized that this is what I want to do. But how do you make a life as an artist? It's rather difficult. I'm still trying to figure it out 20, 30 years later. So I did the geology thing, but I taught myself photography. It became a serious hobby. I practiced it as often as I could. And I loved coming back here and taking pictures whenever I could. But even as a child, I had the photography bug in me. In the summers I spent up here, I always had my sister's hand-me-down cameras. She was more into photography at that time. She was older, and so she gave me her old cameras, and I would take a ton of pictures when I was up here. And then when I got home, I was always, very much looking forward to developing the film and getting it back. This is an early photo from the bridge of the Lost Channel. Again, I think I was like 10 years old when I made that. 30-something years later, I returned just for the heck of it and went on the bridge. And I realized that in that time, as I got older, walking on the bridge was freaking me out. As a kid, you didn't care. Back then, you had the 2 sidewalks, and there wasn't any guardrail, Yeah, but now it's just like I'm walking on the bridge. It's just like, it's terrible getting older. But anyway, I was able to get that little shot. But I started seriously making photos up here around 2003. Again, I lived in Houston at the time in Texas. I was just visiting family for a couple of weeks. And that's when I first started making photos in the 1,000-ounce region. By that point, I've been practicing it for a few years. I always like to start off with this quote here. And by the way, this photograph, this is from the Beaver Pond at the Maxury Trail on the Crooked Creek Preserve. Many of you've been over there. Summertime, it can be rather buggy, but it's a gorgeous trail, and there's a lot of different environments to look at. And I love that Beaver Pond, but I love this quote here. Photography is the easiest medium with which to be really competent. Almost anybody can be competent. It's the hardest medium in which to have some sort of personal vision and to have a signature style. There's two things that make photography unique as an art form. First, it's the most democratic of all art mediums. If you're in the right place at the right time with a smartphone, you can make a great photograph. I could never make a great painting. I can never write a great piece of music, but anybody can make a great photograph. That's why it's fairly easy to get somewhat competent at it. The reason it's so difficult to develop a signature style is because unlike the other mediums, you're dealing with a blank, blank page, a blank canvas, a blank sheet of music. You're starting from nothing. Photography is the other way around. You're given everything. It's the world. It's really an art of selection versus an art of invention. So the real challenge is because we all live in the same world and we kind of see things the same way. Not quite, but we all live in the same world. So how do we differentiate ourselves as a photographer? How do we make photos that somebody else wouldn't? That's the real challenge. It's not clicking the buttons or how to manipulate the camera. That stuff is easy. I say that in workshops and everybody looks at me and says, that's not easy. It's the easy part. The difficult part is having your individuality come through as a photographer, and that's what I've really worked on these past 20 years up here. But again, in 2003, I started to make photos up here seriously. And I went to all those kind of spots I had known growing up and spending time up here. This is just a photograph from the 1,000-Ounce Parkway, just west of Rockport on a summer morning. The bridges, I always loved the bridges growing up, still do. And so this is sunrise underneath the American Span, the nice sun pillar coming up there. Canadian Span, I always love this overlook on the 1,000-Ounce Parkway. I'm sure people recognize these locations around here. A few years later, Rock Island Light, some nice foreground there, kind of directing you to the lighthouse. And of course, you got to get a picture of Low Castle. So, I was doing these kind of photos for a few years. Yeah, I still lived out of state, so I wasn't up here too often. But I quickly realized that this was not the kind of photographs I wanted to do up here. More specifically, this was not the subject matter I wanted to do. One of the things that makes the 1,000-Ounce unique, as we all agree, is the human element is everywhere in the 1,000-Ounce, right? It's not really a wilderness area. There's tons of natural beauty, but we have bridges, we've got castles, we have ships, antique boats, obviously, lighthouses, and and all that stuff is great. It adds to the charm and the allure of this place. It's what makes it unique. I love watching the ship just as much as the next person. But I felt that I'd already seen that in photographs from other people before me. And also I asked myself, what is it about the 1,000-Ounce that I love? Really, what drew me to this place? It's the rocks, it's the water, it's the sky, and how all those elements are interwoven. Right? It's the natural beauty, not the ships, not the castles. And so I thought, well, one way to differentiate myself would be to just focus on the natural scene and not stay away from icons like Low Castle and things like that. And so, in addition to that, once I moved back to Syracuse in 2007, it gave me the opportunity to come up here more often and photograph this area in all the seasons. For years and years growing up, I was only up here in the summertime. I never saw the 1,000-Ounce in the wintertime until I was in my 20s, even when I lived in Syracuse. There's just nowhere to come up here. And it's regarded as a summer place, as we all know. But it's beautiful in all seasons, so I was really looking forward to exploring it in all its different moods and all its different kinds of weather. So instead of a summer sunrise, which I had done before, going out in the wintertime, this is actually sunset from Crane Point. This was the first day of spring in 2016, I think. I remember that year because the river froze completely over, but it froze really late. March was extremely cold that year. And so just walking around Crane Point and just seeing the beauty of wintertime, something different, right? A frozen river. Patterns in the ice, and a little critter leaving tracks across the ice. All different kinds of beauty you see. This is a farmer's field that's just outside the village here, off of Black Creek Road, I believe. Just about the stand of first trees. The sun was coming up, and there's actually frost on all the lower branches in that trees. Ice that had been broken up by wind and wave action in early April and then pushed up against the shoreline. It's a really interesting photo. What I love about photographs like this, and this is more indicative of the type of work I do these days, is that it has no sense of scale. You have no idea really how much area this covers. And so I like having mystery in photographs. I always feel like if you give the viewer all the answers, they're going to look at it and they might say, oh, that's really beautiful sunset, but it's obvious what it is. There's nothing to figure out. You look at it for 5 seconds and you move on. I mean, sunset photographs and sunrise photographs are beautiful. It's obviously, one of nature's greatest displays, but if you've seen them before, there's no mystery. So I'd like to keep people, give them something to think about and maybe ask questions to themselves. They may decide at the end that, that photograph doesn't really do anything for me, and that's okay. But at least it caused them to think for a little bit and consider it before maybe moving on. So wintertime, I love spring. It's my favorite season in the Thousand Islands because it just holds the promise of summer to come and all the fun days ahead. But the color in springtime can rival that of autumn. You get all the buds on the trees. It's from Wellesley Island. Season of fog and mist, as we know. Spring as well as early fall. This is a tree on Wellesley Island called the dancing tree. I made this past spring. It's a stand of birch trees as you're on your way into Wellesley Island State Park. I do so much of my photography over on that state park. But I just love the birch trees and I just love the soft, muted colors. Early spring, just April. Normally we think of March and April as the ugly months, the stick months, the mud months, but there's so much beauty to be found. A little bit later in springtime, a stand of aspen trees, actually, not birch trees, they're just aspen trees along the road. And so a filigree of other trees just right in front of it in a nice foggy morning, just a really soft photograph. If you notice too, these are not what I consider typical Thousand Islands photographs. If you look at these, you may realize that they could have been made anywhere, right? This could be the Adirondacks, this could be down in Rochester in a park, And I really like that. One of my favorite photographers, his name is John Radigan. He died a few years ago, but he did all his work in the Adirondacks. He put out a book several years ago, and in the foreword, it stated that his work wasn't meant to document the mountains, but rather make visible the relationships he sensed there. And so he kind of took the geography out of it and put himself. If art is we're expressing ourselves in art. So knowing that, then it really shouldn't be about the subject matter. It really should be about you as an artist and how you react to that subject matter and how you relate to it. So that's what I try to bring to it. Again, it says more about me than the place. These are all photographs inspired by the beauty of the Thousand Islands. So it's there, but it's not so obvious. Except in scenes like this, this is a beautiful day with storms coming in and out in May. I mean, there was fog on the river up until about 4 or 5 in the afternoon. I've never seen anything like it. It's gorgeous. This is April. It looks like it would be summertime. It's beautiful light on these hemlocks, side light, and just shadows, and more typical Thousand Islands photograph, but just one of my favorite photographs up here. And of course, in summer, you also get the fog, just a simple view of the reeds and the mist. Very simple scenes. I love simplicity and minimalism in photography. French Creek Wildlife Management Area just outside of town here. Nothing more iconic than the pitch pine and the pink granite of the Thousand Islands. It's not really granite. I'll get to that later. Well, this is called granite, but close enough. But yeah, we love the pink granite and the pitch pine, which I love to photograph. I'll talk more about the pitch pine later on. And of course, autumn. I never experienced autumn in the Thousand Islands until just a few years ago. And it comes late. I run workshops up here in autumn, and I push into the end of October. This photograph was made, I think, in the first week of November. The water is warm. It takes a longer time to cool off than the air does, and so that moderates the temperatures up here, and it keeps the fall color on the trees. And a lot of them are oaks, too, and oaks turn later. That's along the Eel Bay Trail. The Granite Trail around the Anthony Common Nature Center. The fallen old branch and then leaves. I carefully placed each leaf on the grass. I didn't. I could have. As a little photographer, I can be like a painter. I can make the scene, but I didn't do it. It's better when it happens naturally. Something a little different for me. That's a willow tree over by the marina at Wellesley Island State Park. It was just a very, very windy afternoon. Normally I do Testament. I like everything very sharp with my photographs. But if you can't beat it, join it. And so I just did a 5-second exposure and just let the wind do its thing. I'll give you something more of an impressionistic type of photograph. A lot of photographers do ICM these days, intentional camera movement. They'll move the camera, do a 2-second exposure, move the camera. This is similar to that, but a bit different as well. I did this last during a workshop. This was past autumn. Around Wellesley Island State Park and all those trails, there's just so many areas about it. It's low bush blueberry. Obviously in the summertime, it's all the green leaves, but they just turn this crimson bright red in the fall. It's all over the place in Wellesley Island. It's just stunning. I mean, it's just a carpet of it, beautiful trees. This is the Granite Trail, and I know, everybody goes to Manatee Common Nature Center. Everybody does the Eel Bay Trail to the Narrows. But there's so many trails over there, and there's parts of Wellesley Island that I'm still exploring. It's just, I can tell people hardly ever go there. There's just so much beauty out here. And the interior of the islands, it's not all about the river and the shoreline. There's just so much. I spent a lot of time in the Adirondacks, and there's similarities between the two areas, but there's a lot of stark differences. And walking around Wellesley Island, you really see them. It's a very unique landscape, totally different than anything I've seen, even in the Adirondacks. So here's the plug-in, right? So subtle, right? But when I started, photographing the Thousand Islands throughout the seasons, I thought this would make a good idea for a book. And so a couple years ago, I put a book together, self-published, called The Thousand Islands Through the Seasons. And it's just an example of some of the pages inside. It is for sale in the bookstore. They're closed for now, so don't go rushing over it. Another time, but anyway. All right, enough of that shameless self-promotion stuff. So, I started photographing up here. I decided that I wanted to focus on the more natural element, less on the human element up here. And I made these kinds of photos. So this is from Camelot Island, one of the park islands on the Canadian side. And of course, one of my favorite spots is Crooked Creek. It's on Route 12 right behind it. But in 2015 or so, I became a real student. So many landscape photographers like myself, we don't have an art background. Painters do, musicians do, sculptors do. Most landscape photographers don't. We come from different fields, engineering, science, medical, could be anywhere. And I was one of those people. I never availed myself of all the vast wealth of knowledge of photographers or artists before me. And once I started reading up on not just Ansel Adams, we all know about Adams, but other photographers from the last century, it really opened my eyes as to what photography could be. And it made me realize that landscape photography in general, more specifically, can be so much more than just showcase what things look like. Anybody can see. That's what that really looked like. Anybody else who was there with me at this spot would have seen that. Yes, it's fine for that, but it can be more than a recording device. You can actually do something much more creative, something that reflects your way of seeing, not just things you see, but how you see them and how you render them in a photograph. It could be during composition. It could be in processing afterward. I think we all know about Photoshop, and I often get the question, has that been Photoshopped? Well, Photoshop is just a digital darkroom. Ansel Adams in the darkroom, 80 years ago, he severely changed reality to what he wanted it to be. So manipulation of photographs has been going on since the beginning of photography. So Photoshop is nothing new. It just makes it a lot easier. But anyway, AI is another matter, but I won't even go there. So these kinds of scenes are fine, but I wanted to do more of this. I wanted to bring something more personal, more Chris Murray into my photographs. I wanted to go beyond just obvious appearances. I wanted to photograph things that only I would have seen and render them in a way that only I would, bringing my individuality into it. I like this quote from Aristotle. Did it really come from Aristotle? I'm not sure, but I've seen it in a couple of places. The aim of art is to represent not the outward appearance of things, but their inward significance. I have two objectives with my photography. First is what I just kind of described. I want to make photos that reflect who I am as a person, that reflect my personality, my sensibility, something that has meaning other than just pretty. So I want it to reflect me. But more than that, when it comes to nature, I want to create photographs that showcase all the many ways in which beauty is manifested in nature. We think of sunrises and sunsets and mountain vistas, fall foliage and spring flowers. Those are really the pinnacles of nature's spectacular displays. But beauty can be found anywhere if you look for it. And I feel, because I was one of these people, I never really appreciated it before. I never really noticed it. I find beauty in tree roots, the patterns of tree roots on the ground, or pine needles on the ground, lichen on rocks, That's the beauty of photography. It makes you see the world in ways you never really saw it before, all the things you missed before. And so the goal of my photography, again, to make it personal, of course, but also to really show, especially up here in the Thousand Islands, all the beauty that's out there that people may not see. It's just to help open their eyes. Bless you. These are cattail blades, obviously, but just, I love black and white photography these days, and it's dark. And so the choice of subject matter and the processing of it brings something a bit more personal into it. Several examples. My all-time favorite photograph, walking around the McSherry Trail one late winter afternoon, and I came upon these fallen pine needles on this old frozen snow on the ground beneath the tree. And I just saw the pattern in pine needles. I just fell in love with the scene. This is what it really looked like. This is the raw file without any kind of processing done. But I knew I would convert it to black and white. Color doesn't really do anything for you here. But I also wanted to get rid of the texture of the snow. I just wanted to be a white background. I wanted to render it kind of an abstract photograph. Leslie loves this photograph. What is that? No. And so by doing it, you come up with something like this. It's just a study in line and shapes and just random patterns. But the beauty of this is years ago, 10 years ago, I never would have seen anything like this. I never would have considered this as a possible photograph. Now, does everybody love this photograph? I doubt it. I love the photograph because what it represents. It's really a quality of seeing and noticing these things, right? But and also really just the spontaneity of it and that thrill of discovery of seeing something like this. But the more personal our work is, I'm sure Sarah Ellen would agree, any other artist in here, the more personal your work is, the smaller your audience will be, but the more fervent it will be. If you do nothing but travel the world, and there are lots of landscape photographers who just go to the most beautiful places in the world and make these stunning photographs, and they make a lot of money selling their prints, and that's all going good. And there's nothing wrong with that, but yes, they have a larger audience. But I think when you do stuff like this, I just find it much more personally rewarding. Walking around the Otter Creek Preserve in the spring a couple of years ago, I just saw these ferns on the ground. Obviously, you had these older ferns and then some of these fresh, new green ferns. And thinking, again, in black and white, the green is pretty, but what I was seeing was, in addition to the shapes of the ferns, which I love, you had these tonal differences or differences in brightness between the fresh green ferns and those darker ferns. And so in black and white, I knew I could really exploit that into something much more special. I mean, it's a pretty photo, but it's just, it's nice. But I think when you do something like this, it just makes it something much more special. Obviously, it's not reality in any way, shape, or form, but all I can say, I don't care about objective reality. I care about inner reality. And that's really what I want to come through in my photographs. Just reeds in the river, this is the raw file, just on a foggy day. And it's pretty in color, but the color, again, doesn't really do anything for you. So it's black and white. It's a very simple photograph from the causeway in Clayton. Just went for a walk one morning. And looking at, the marina, St. Lawrence Restoration, right behind them. It's a very simple photograph. That's what's beautiful about things like this. You're not reliant on spectacular conditions, spectacular sunrises, or, you can find this stuff any time of the year on most days, if you're open and receptive to it and noticing these things. You just see things that you never would have seen before. Over at Wells Down State Park by the marina, I remember this morning very well. I had gone out to do some photography, obviously, at sunrise. I'm walking around, I'm not really seeing anything new. And I've set my tripod up in the same spot before. And as a photographer, you're in trouble when you keep going back to the same spots and putting a tripod in the same spots. Because you're just starting to repeat yourself. You're not seeing anything new. You're going to the tried and true and maybe hoping for some different conditions. That's fine sometimes. But I made this photograph, and technically, it's a very well done photograph. Compositionally, it's very well done. It's got all the things we kind of look for. That's really working on screen, but you got these leading lines about these bushes and the flowers kind of leading you to the tree and the sunrise. So it works as a landscape photograph, but I made it. I felt empty afterward. I just didn't feel like there was nothing new here. I've done this kind of scene before. There's no growth. But walking around about 20 minutes later, I made this photograph. Just pine needles just gathered on the floor, on the ground. They were orange, of course, but just converting it to black and white and just working with the processing, adding some depth to it. Now, this is one where I did place every pine needle. Sure. It took a while. But so, you know, two different photographs, two very different photographs. One that's much more objective in nature. You know, this is pretty much how the scene looked, and that was my goal in doing this photograph. Something much more creative, much more personal. Which one would sell? This one. Oh, wow. Can't have it all. That's okay. You can go into art to make money. I would say the geologist. That was I love, you know, partially because I'm a geologist, but I do love the rock up here. That's one of the first things, as I said as a child, that really caught my attention. It's that beautiful granite in the early morning. The light was coming in from the right-hand side, and just the reflection. It works in color. You do see all the different shades of pink and orange in the rock, but it's kind of nice in black and white too. It's kind of got a cubist feel for it. Just like Picasso. No, not at all like Picasso. But it adds much more kind of abstract quality to it, so it works in both ways. But again, just focusing on these little scenes, these little intimate scenes in nature. You can just find this stuff everywhere. Tree roots. You know, this is right along the shoreline, a fallen willow tree. I was doing a private workshop with someone, and I just saw these, you know, upended on the roots, and I loved the look of it. It's kind of got the circular pattern to it. I love the black and white. I love the differences in tones and texture in the wood, and there's a depth to it as well. One of my favorite photos that I've made over the past several years. It's a very simple scene. Just overcast light, no dramatic conditions, no big storms coming in or anything like that. Just a very simple scene. Something I would have walked by, you know, 1,000 times years ago. In fact, I probably would have walked by it the day before. It's just on that day. I just happened to notice it. I don't always see well. You're out in nature and you're thinking about bills and errands and stuff you have to do when you get home and all that stuff. And that can really get in the way of seeing things. But if you can clear your mind and really be present, mindfulness, we hear all about that these days. You get into that zone and that flow and really notice these things. Lily pads on the water. I just came across this quote a few weeks ago, one of my favorite podcasts. Nice, and we see things not as they are, we see things as we are. I love it. You know, we always talk about reality in photographs, but we all see things different. I know sometimes my wife will look at something on color and she'll say, "Oh, that's green." I'm like, "That's gray." It's just like, "Can't you see? It's gray," you know. But so, you know, we do see things differently. But also, when we look at artwork, you know, and what we see in that artwork is really a reflection of us. You know, it's not reality; it's how we see it, and we all see things differently based on our expectations. That's part of our individual style and our vision, right? All those things that made us who we are, that comes through, not just when we make our work, but also when we look at our work. I guess beauty is in the eye of the beholder is one way of saying that, one often overused. Wintertime. Yeah. These are 4 trees at the end of Calumet Island, just in a winter fog. Just shot from Frank Park. I was driving by in the car, getting ready to drive back to Syracuse, and just saw these trees sitting out there. It's a very simple winter scene. It's dark, right? But this is wintertime on 1,000 Islands. It's beautiful, isn't it? Isn't it? No, I'm just kidding. Winter's not everybody's cup of tea. It's my favorite season for photography. I love simplicity. I love minimalism. I love black and white. And a lot of times, winter is just black and white by its nature. This is a farmer's field, very close to that colored version I had with the birch trees. This is another stand of birch trees just outside of Clayton. I think this may have been that same foggy morning. It wasn't snow, it was just a winter fog, and I just love that lone stand of trees. There's an old saying by, I won't go into the name of the photographer, but it said expressive images are images that are not of something, they're about something. So yeah, it's a picture of trees in a field. That's what it's of. But it's really about, this picture is about desolation, isolation. Some of those things are common to feel in wintertime. And I felt that looking at it. And all the decisions I made in terms of composition were meant to give the photograph that feeling so that when people saw it, they would also feel that way. We can't control 100% how people react to our photos, but you know, if we have an emotional response to the photo, we can do things. The way we compose it, the colors we put into it, whether we leave color in or take color out to help bring that emotion out in the viewer. So by including a lot of negative space around these trees, it makes you feel like you're sitting there alone and isolated. they're the focal point of the photo. But if I had zoomed in on those trees, you wouldn't have all the emptiness around it. They wouldn't feel alone and isolated. But like zooming out and putting all that negative space in there, it just gives it that feeling of isolation. And I just love negative space too, because it just gives the viewer's eye a place to relax. Wintertime, just walking around the marina at Wells Island State Park. I just saw these. I have no idea. I'm not a botanist. I'm a geologist, damn it. But, so I don't know what kind of fern this is, but I just love the shapes. Just gorgeous. I made a little trip here of just snow on rock. They look like puzzle pieces. Yeah, just walking around, and I almost always shoot with a tripod. I want sharp images, but it helps slow me down. But nice thing about winter, it's so bright. Just walking around and just making different images and trying different things. It's all about shapes and contrast. It's a very simple idea. Not all about black and white. I still do a lot of color work. This is reindeer moss in autumn. It's just fallen leaves on it. And when you think of fall foliage, you always think of these gorgeous maple trees and all this fall color and all that. But this is autumn as well. This is from Sand Cove on the Eel Bay Trail out to the Narrows. I just love the willow trees. It has a very almost Far East kind of feel to it. Maybe it's the shape of the leaves or whatever, but it's got a bit of an eastern feel to it. And I love that sensibility in photographs as well as any artwork. And what I love about scenes like this, I talk about this in my workshops. It's common for photographers, landscape photographers, to really plan their imagery. They'll learn of a location, and they'll see somebody else's picture of it. Say, okay, I'm going to go there, and they say, all right, it's best at sunrise, it's best at sunset, or it's best at this time condition or this time of year. So they really heavily plan the photo. They get there. Hopefully, Mother Nature does her thing, and they get the photo they want. And I used to operate like that, but I much prefer just to go out with a blank slate in my mind, no expectations. That's really how you see it. I found that when I had preconceptions of what I wanted to photograph, I was so honed in on that I missed everything else. I was completely oblivious. And as I mentioned with the pine needles and snow, it really enhances my experience out in nature. I love surprise and discovery. It's fine to plan things, but when it works out, I find that I'm kind of let down because I expected it. When you happen upon things like this, I had no idea when I went out. This was middle of the day. It was sunny out that day, but there's a cloud or something had happened, and it appeared before me. I love that element of surprise. And of course, the rock, the banded granite gneiss that we have up here at the Silver and Key Wave State Park. Walking around that park, I just love the swirls, right? I hate to say it, but nature is kind of the artist in this sense. I was just there to capture it. Frozen river and these bands of just blown snow on the ice. My sister's not here, but when I made this photograph, the sun had just come up and sunlight was just coming in. You kind of see a subtle sunlight out here. But because of the sunlight, it bathed in this warm light, which I didn't like. It's ice, snow, it's winter. I wanted to look cool. And so in processing, I made it blue. And when I said that, she's like, don't tell me that. I don't want to know. She really liked the photo. And to her, I ruined it because I changed it. It really wasn't like that. And much to her chagrin, I gave her a lesson on it. But I always think of that when I see this photograph. So did it look like that in reality? No, but I'm an artist. I can do whatever I want. Painters can do whatever they want. I can do whatever I want. So what's next for me? That's a good question. I don't know where I'm going next in my photography. Creativity, and Sarah Ellen knows this, it's up and down. Sometimes you go through periods where you're really creative, you're seeing things are flowing, you get all these ideas, and then you go through periods where nothing is coming. It's writer's block, any kind of artistic medium. I'm all about growth. I don't like repeating myself. I don't like doing the same kinds of photos over again. If I do one photo of one thing, if I see anything else that makes me think of that or is too similar to it, I just don't capture it. I just don't see the point in doing that. The problem is, as I've been doing this now for 28 years, I'm making fewer and fewer photos every year because fewer and fewer photos pass muster. I'm not really seeing anything that's really exciting me. You see a lot, but you become desensitized. You know it, right? You become desensitized to the news. Sometimes that's good, and it's a coping mechanism. Sometimes it's bad, but you get, kind of overly saturated. And so it's hard to wow myself now. I went over to this summer. I went Thousand Island again, but on some different trails. And I made some photos, and I was just like, so I don't know, not sure where I'm going to go. But here's some more recent examples. Just a simple little tree in April, and I just love the shapes of the grass. This is Outer Creek, just outside A Bay, right close to the parking lot. Just a little scene. This is a nice photograph. I made this in December last year, just a foggy early winter morning. It was unseasonably warm, so you just have this beautiful fog.
Yeah.
Trillium. I made this photo back in 2015 when Otter Creek was first established by Till. And there's a trail that if anybody goes Otter Creek, the kayak point, you go out there, and in spring, there's this beautiful field of trillium at the base of this small cliff. It's very pretty like that. But I went back a couple of years later and did a different version of it.
Oh.
Right? Just a completely different way of seeing it. I can't think of a photographer now. You should know this. He said, our job as photography is not to see new things, it's to see things anew. And I thought this was a great example of that. You know, I'd seen it before, so it was a new thing then, but now I'm seeing it anew in a different way, imagining it in a different way. Spring Point in Morgan Island, just look at the different lines coming together, just scanning the rocks. I was there for about a good hour that morning, just looking around and trying different compositions on the rocks. Just a very simple diagonal lines, everything kind of coming into that simple point. Oh, my pitch pines, I love my pitch pines. Just love the shapes and the branches, that gnarliness of them, the long needles. Interesting thing about pitch pines, you know, I spent a lot of time in the Adirondacks, as I mentioned. I never see them there. They're a southern species. And you may all know this, but they occur in the Appalachians a lot. In southern New Jersey, there's the pine barrens. It's all pitch pine. Then you don't see them anywhere else north except in the Thousand Islands. Only here, and only on the Frontenac axis, only where you have all this granite gneiss. If we go down to Ogdensburg, or down to Ogdensburg, or up to Cape Vincent, you don't see it anymore. It's just in this small area. It's just weird. But I love the shape again. It's gnarly bark. It's got such texture in the bark, its branches. There's nice. This is right before sunset. The sun had just gone down, so there's nice soft light coming in on it. It's a very simple image. Yeah, an oak tree. I was again on one of my spring workshops last year. I don't take many photographs during my workshops because it's for them to photograph them. But they're all doing their thing, and I just spotted this tree in the far distance, and I put on my longest lens I had. I was shocked it came out this well. It was just in the shade. An oak tree. I call it the Medusa tree. And just that fresh green foliage. So you see the branches enough, but just the shapes are just. I'll never forget when I uploaded it onto my computer. I was just like, oh my God. That doesn't happen often enough, but I love that one. And of course, being a geologist, walking around DeWolf Point State Park. It's funny, I visited DeWolf probably 10 years ago for the first time. And walked around with my camera, and it's like, there's really nothing here. I know, right? So, so I didn't go back for years. I'm thinking, no, as I've gotten better as an artist and seeing things better, I'm like, go back there. There has to be something there. And I went there this winter, and I was seeing everything. And of course, it's great in wintertime because it's closed. I mean, you can get in, but there's nobody there. And there's this huge rock cliff in the woods, and I just saw it has this green tone to it. I enhanced the green in processing because, again, I can't. But it was just taking just different pictures of the rock and I love something like this. It's just a very simple photo. And I could, anywhere along that rock face, there's about 30, 40 yards of it. And it's like, I saw so many different things I can go back there and photograph once the people are gone. All right, so we're going to transition. That's enough photography for now. We can talk more about that at the end of this questions or discussion, but I said I'd give a little geologic history of the Thousand Islands. How many of you have heard about the geologic history of the Thousand Islands before? Oh, you're already all experts at it. I'll give the Cliff Notes version, like I said. So I like to think of geologic history of this area. It's really two parts. The first part dates back about 1.2, 1.3 million years ago. The rock that we all call the granite, metamorphic granite, really. That makes up the Thousand Islands. It's all part of the Canadian Shield. Canadian Shield is a huge, massive rock that makes up really much the nucleus of the North American continent. It's not exposed everywhere. On this really poor schematic, it shows you where it's exposed. but it occurs elsewhere. It's just buried under younger sedimentary rock. The Adirondacks is something I learned only 10, 15 years ago, is really the easternmost extension of the Canadian Shield. The Adirondacks are the Canadian Shield, and they're connected to the main body by, as we know, the Frontenac axis, the Thousand Islands. So anybody who's involved with tilt or states of river, when you hear about the HOA corridor, the unique ecological corridor, that's because of Frontenac Arch. But the reason we see the rocks here in the Thousand Islands is because we have this arch. You don't notice it. Every time I drive up from Syracuse or on Route 12, I always try to see, tell them coming up on anything. It's a very subtle uplift in land. But the reason we see the Canadian Shield here is when you have uplift in geology, anytime like anything that's raised up is more exposed to the elements, wind, rain, snow. And so over the millennia, all that younger sedimentary rock on the top has been eroded away. That's why if you've noticed, around the bridge or down to A Bay, you see all the metamorphic granite, but then as you continue to drive down toward Ogdensburg, you don't see it anymore. You see the sedimentary rock. You see the same thing as you go down to Cape Vincent. So that's why you're coming off that axis. Now you're seeing all that younger rock that has been eroded away. In Clayton, interestingly enough, all the rock we see around Clayton is mostly all Potsdam sandstone. So if you're down at Frank Park and you're walking on that beautiful rock, unfortunately they kind of covered over when they did a lot of the work down there. That's all Potsdam sandstone. Round Island is Potsdam sandstone. Grindstone is half and half. There's a lot of Potsdam there. There's a lot of Potsdam on Wells Island as well. I'm sure then you all know about the famous rock cut outside Alexandria Bay. As you're going down Route 12, you're heading east on Route 12, it's a couple miles outside the village. You have this unconformity, that's Potsdam sandstone on top, and then you have the metamorphic Precambrian rock below, a 600 million year gap in the rock record. So either there was no deposition during that time or something was long gone. But anyway, that's very famous. And then, of course, the second part of the story, fast forward about, again, 1.1 billion years and change. End of the last ice age when the ice sheets retreated. When Lake Ontario, when the St. Lawrence River Valley was still blocked, the Great Lakes drained through the Mohawk Valley, which is why if you drive down toward Albany on the thruway, you get to that one part past Kanajahari and Sharon Springs, and you see that huge cliffs on either side. It was caused by the meltwater from the Great Lakes when it used to drain that way when the St. Lawrence was still blocked. But once the ice sheets retreated further to the north, then it drained via the St. Lawrence River Valley. St. Lawrence Valley is a fault zone, which is why we do have earthquakes up here. In fact, the biggest earthquake ever recorded in New York State was in Messina, sometime in the sometime in the early 20th century. So it is a fault zone, which is why the water found that. This is actually known as a flooded landscape. The river is only 10,000 years old. It's a very recent, new phenomenon. It's a flooded landscape. Before the river filled in here, it was very hilly or very hummocky. The softer rock had been eroded away. That's why you had these valleys. And where you had the more resistant Precambrian rock, that's where all the hilltops that we see right now. So when the floodwaters from the Great Lakes came through here and flooded this area, all the islands are just 1,000 hilltops. These are just hills, which is why the water depth in the 1,000 islands is so unpredictable and weird. So shallow at times and so deep at times, and often not where you'd expect. So it's just a flooded landscape, very uneven, hummocky terrain that had flooded. And of course, before, right after the glaciers receded and before the land rebounded, the Champlain Sea came in. So the ocean came pretty far down into the St. Lawrence River Valley as well as Champlain. That's why marine fossils can be found pretty far inland, around Ogdensburg area, things like that. But then it's weird, but the land is like a mattress. If you press down on the mattress, that's what the glaciers did to the land. And you release your hand, the mattress pops back up. That's what the Earth's crust did. And once it came back up, pushed the seawater out and fresh water came back. That's all the geology. No. I never studied geology up here. I'm being a geologist. I read it and it kind of made sense. But I know you've heard that all before. So my last slide here, if you're interested in seeing more of my work, you can go to my website, chrismurrayphotography.com. I lead workshops through the Adirondack Photography Institute. And I'm also on the board and current board chair of Thousand Islands Art Center. If you're not a member of the Art Center, why are you not a member of the Art Center? Yeah, please consider joining. So, but yeah, thank you everyone for your attention and appreciate your time. questions? Yes.
I have one online.
Okay.
So how often when you take a photo that you think is really going to be great, does it meet your expectations? And conversely, how often does a photo that you really didn't think was anything really special turn out to be what you consider a really good photo?
Often. Often, yeah. I mean, there's times I'll come home and think there's nothing there, and just, I don't know, for whatever reason, you know, when I download the computer, start working, it just comes alive. And then I love it when that happens. And conversely, it often happens that I'll be in the field, something excites me then, and then I'll get it home, and I don't know what happened. There's nothing I can do with it. It just doesn't work. I just can't explain why. I'd like to think that, you know, as you develop, that you could kind of predict that. Yeah, no photographer can. It just works like that. So it happens often.
And you could have done that back there 40, 50 years ago before digital camera. I remember with the Zeiss, you had to have the coloring, and exposure, and white film.
You could do all this stuff. It was just a lot more difficult. A lot more difficult, yeah. Certainly, you know, again, in the black and white, you know, the dodging and burning, the things that, you know, they had to do in the darkroom back then, you could take, you know, now it takes not even 5 minutes to do in Lightroom or Photoshop. So it's a lot easier. You know, I don't spend a lot of time on processing. I like it. It's part of the creative process. I view the time in the field. Photographer I follow it, I enjoy it. He likened it to baking a cake. You know what? It's like mixing the cake batter, but not putting it in the oven. You know, I figure I come back from the field, that's half of my job. Now it's going to be the other half is processing that image. Because again, you know, some images I do very little to. I like them as they are. Color works, so I'm going to keep them in color. So I don't do a lot of manipulation. Others have converted into black and white, but that's so easy these days. But I try not to do any really heavy-handed processing. I don't want it to look like it's been processed. Sometimes I can visualize the image in my head, what I want it to look like in the end. We always say that that's the way to go because that way you know what you're doing. You're not just fiddling around in Photoshop trying things, but also there is just as many photographers and artists who say, keep an open mind and just play. And sometimes things come alive and you see it. You plan on doing this with the image, but then somewhere along the process, it's like, no, you take a left-hand turn and do something different. It's that the discovery can happen in the field. It can happen in front of the computer as well. That's why I enjoy that. Jane.
Geology.
No, sorry, I don't do that anymore.
No, well, you refer to the granite up here as metamorphic granite, but I mean, are you?
All the rock, so if you think back to your Earth science days, where you have igneous, metamorphic, and sedimentary rock. So metamorphic rock is either sedimentary rock or igneous rock that's been altered due to unimaginable heat and pressure. So all the rock we have, the Canadian Shield, you know, talk about that. It's all metamorphic rock. Some of it is meta-igneous. What was granite is now granite gneiss. I showed that one photograph of the banded, the dark minerals that over in Key Wade, and that's gneiss. Granite gneiss is now granite that's been metamorphosed, and it causes that banding, you see. There was sandstone back then that was metamorphosed and became quartzite. Quartzite is the metamorphic equivalent of sandstone. So all the rock that we see here is really metamorphic. Forget about Potsdam, that's its original sandstone, but the Canadian Shield, the Precambrian rock that we call granite, all the pink and orange, it's all metamorphic. Some of it's meta-sedimentary sandstone that's been metamorphosed. Some of it's meta-igneous, which is granite that's been altered, and now it's a different rock type. The reason why the Potsdam looks so similar to the granite gneiss, if you ever noticed it, is because both rock types are about 95% quartz. So that's why it's sometimes hard. It's sometimes hard
To get it close to.
Yeah, when you look, if it's sedimentary rock, you can see layering because it's deposited, right? So you see the layers. Whereas igneous or metamorphic rock is all just magma that, you know, cooled, and so it has this amorphous shape. You see that road cut. You can see that sediment and Potsdam on top has layers to it, and then the stuff below is just this amorphous mess.
Thank you. Sure.
Just doing
Other geology. Talking about plateau, is that connected at all?
It's not. No, it's not. That is all sedimentary rock, much younger rock. It's a tilted mesa, this is why it is tilted. That's why they get such terrible snowstorms, because that changes.
It seems to have the same height as the Adirondacks.
Yeah, well, of some of the foothills in there, but completely different. Yeah, the Adirondacks is just a weird beast. Yeah, as everybody I think knows, they're not part of the Appalachians, even though they look like the Catskills in certain ways, all tree covered, and Catskills are Appalachian. Adirondacks is its own. The Adirondacks are young mountains carved from very, very old rock. But the mountains of the Adirondacks are actually young mountains, just like the St. Lawrence River is a very young river with very ancient rock.
The pine, the pitch pine
Yep.
that was on the island, was that on Pitkin Island that you took?
Oh, the color one?
Mhm.
That was actually bluff.
Oh, that's what I meant to say. Wow.
How do you know?
No, because I think I might have painted that tree.
Oh, really?
Yeah, I know, it's funny,
I mean,
but.
I wasn't the only one who saw it.
No, but I think that everybody looks at it differently, but.
Oh, sure, yeah.
Yeah, but I think, I mean, it seems like artists, photographers are drawn.
Mhm.
That I have so many things I want to ask you, but I'll just skip that for now.
I have a geology question. I'm not sure how it applies, but when the glacier was formed, the big glacier,
Yeah.
thing, and it moved,
Mhm.
as that movement, I presume as an engineer, that the weight of it just kept shoving away from the highest point to the lowest point. It wasn't like going down a river. It was just piled so much.
Oh, yeah, it was like 2 miles of ice just.
Yeah, and then it just couldn't
gradually.
hold itself, so it just pushed away.
The ice pushed away, you mean?
So it piled more on the top and the edges shove out. So
So
what drove the ice to?
gravity.
All right, so gravity pushing down on the high pile.
Yep.
Shoves the sides aside
I
and
guess
more
so.
piles in.
I guess so. Mr. Engineer. No, I didn't really think about, I guess.
I never took my job.
She was a geologist as well. So yeah. Anyway, no, that's a good point. It is interesting to know, however, the shapes of some of these islands up here. If you ever notice when you look out at them, the downriver end will be very steep, and the upriver end will kind of come to a tail. It's called a whaleback, or a roche monnaie in French. But that's the glacier moving over. It tends to, going over rock, it'll smooth that side of it, and then as it goes over the top of it, it'll pluck the rock off the down side, and that makes it steep. We were in Rockport for a couple of days. I'm looking out right at Pine Island and Cleopatra Island, right out in front of Rockport. I can see these perfectly shaped, the islands are thick at one end, really tall at one end, then come to this tail at the other end. You can see that profile. Different from a drumlin, which we also have around here. It also has that backwards, upside down spoon, steeper end and then a longer tail. And a lot of these islands have, I see glacier evidence everywhere. Morgan Island at Green Point State Park, you see all these glacial furrows that have been, the glaciers as they retreated or moved over the rock, they carved out just these really smooth. And it's interesting because the glaciers move south to north, and those furrows are just oriented perfectly. It's like a compass. It's pretty cool. It's like, that's north. Yeah. Anyway, geology's cool.
So another photography question or comment question slash. So personally, my photography, that was one of my original arts, and I went to college for it and studied and worked in the business. And I think one of the things that I personally found was that sometimes just a new device was the way my creativity would be sparked, and I wonder if that's true for you. That sometimes, like if maybe you get a new lens and suddenly you're like, oh, okay, then you have a new.
Yeah, I think that it could definitely work. Yeah, I think so. I'm really big on. There are photographers who hopscotch all over the place and always go to new locations, and I get that. It's exciting to explore and travel and see new things. But I'm of the belief to really photograph an area well, you have to know it. So you see things. The first time you go to a spot, you just don't see deeply. You see all the superficial things that anybody sees. And that's why I go on these trails around here, and I've hiked them dozens of times, and I'll see something on the 50th time that I didn't see on the previous 49 times I hiked that trail. But it can get inspiration kind of wane when you don't see. I mean, now that we live up here, not that it was far from Syracuse, but I even telling myself I got to go down to Lake Ontario. I don't see a beach around here. And Lake Ontario is like the ocean. And I see other photographers work. It's like, oh, the things I could do at Southwood. I just got to get my butt down there. So I think that's one way of seeing that. You got to cut yourself some slack. You have to see new things. You have to feel inspired. You know, it's good to be familiar with an area. I'm a big, strong proponent in that. See it well, photograph it well. You have to be intimate. You have to know it intimately. But at some point, then you also got to have fun. I always get accused of not having fun. Serious. I don't think the council had fun with painting.
That's not fun.
It's not fun. It's work. Photography, art is, if you're serious about it, it is, and I'm not building myself up here, it's, I mean, I'll get people in my workshop saying, oh, I just like to do it for fun. I'm like, okay, that's fine. That's good for you. But it's not fun. It's hard work. And it's frustrating. When it works, it's incredibly rewarding. When it doesn't work, it's incredibly frustrating, depressing. And so it's like any passion, right? It comes at a price. So I wouldn't trade it because the highs are so high, but the lows are, it's not fun. It's deeper than, for me, it's deeper than fun. But that's just me. It doesn't mean everybody has to approach it like that. It's just what you want to get out of it. There's so many different kinds of photography. It just depends on what you hope to get out of it. I just saw it as, what started as, oh, I love nature. I'm going to take these really beautiful pictures. It became, for me, more of an inward exploration of myself and discovery of myself, not so much the world, but I was a scientist. I didn't know I was an artist. I came from a not artistic family at all. I had no idea I was good in math and science, so I became a scientist. And lo and behold, I'm a much better artist than I was a scientist. I never would have imagined, but it took me 55 years to figure that out. So anyway. But the Thousand Islands is my inspiration for it all. Comes back to you themselves. It's my hardest area to photograph. I lived in Syracuse for many years. I found it easier to photograph in Green Lake State Park and Chittenango Falls and all the state parks around there, Labrador Hollow, south of Syracuse. Of course, the Adirondacks are beautiful. So over the years, the Thousand Islands have been my most challenging area to photograph to my satisfaction. I'm not sure why that's the case, but it's still kind of vexing at times. But challenge is good.
Have you considered doing the large format, black and white photos?
Oh, like an 8x10?
Yeah.
I haven't considered it. I regret, I've never done darkroom work. That wasn't, if I had gone if I studied in school, I would have done it. But I haven't considered it, but it's intriguing, yes. Film is kind of making a bit of a comeback like all things do, it slows you down. It's more digital. I see it I learned on film, slide film, but at least it was film. It's pre-digital when I learned photography. Now with digital, it's a spray and pray approach. So many people get out there with their camera. They're not being discriminated. It's so easy to take a picture and it's free. Not every frame costs a few cents like it used to. So they take 100 pictures and they hope that 5 of them are good. And that's an editor. You're not an artist now. You're just taking a ton of pictures that just gets there. So that's one reason why I like a tripod. But the technology is getting such that you can handhold in so many instances where you couldn't 10 years ago. But tripod slows you down. Anything that can slow you down and make you more deliberate. And 8x10. It cracks me up in workshops. People complain about having to switch out a lens. So they buy 2 or 3 camera bodies so they don't have to switch out their lenses. It cracks me up. It's like, well, think about Ansel Adams, lugging around 8x10 glass plates. We all got so lazy with, right? Conveniences can come at a price. Convenience can kill creativity or other things. It would be intriguing.
Pardon?
It would be intriguing, yes, doing it. I would love to see it.
We have some photos of Everglades from Flag Butcher.
Oh, yes,
Oh, yeah.
yeah.
I thought maybe that would be kind of a neat thing.
Yeah, I love that. Yeah. I do. I said, I think probably 3/4 of my work these days is black and white. Color doesn't really excite me too often anymore. So I'm more interested in tonal variations and lines and shapes. Color is so distracting. I think when people look at photographs, if you think of the visual elements, line, shape, form, texture, color is the first thing they see. And a lot of times I don't want them to see the color. I want them to look beyond it. So I won't keep you, take it out. But again, that's what I'm trying to emphasize, you know, say in the workshop. What are you trying to say in your photograph? You know, verbalize it if you need to. Well, then why you have this in the photograph? Why are you doing that? You know, just like a painting, keep only the essential elements in there and get rid of the rest. And so it just distracts. Sounds easy. In some ways it's easy, in some ways it's not. Awesome. Well, thank you, everyone.